Alex, thanks so much for doing this. Can you talk about Sunjo and space?
Sure. Soonjo is kind of my personal side project. I play in other bands, but Soonjo is just kind of like the place for me to write and get my own ideas across when it's not really the best place to present it to other bands. I mean, I've been doing that on and off for like 15 some years now.
I had a vision of memories. I thought I lost them with my old school tape machine. I get nostalgic for
It kind of took like a pandemic to kind of take the next step.
Very cool. I guess that's kind of the silver lining then. When did you write space?
I wrote Space, I think in like the late 2000s, like 2008, something like that. After I moved back from Minneapolis, I actually wrote it for my brother who was doing an art project. And like the original idea was to have a dancer with a bunch of cameras on her arms, her shoulders, her legs, and to kind of mesh all those camera angles into one. And so he needed music for that. I like working under pressure, even though I hate to say that, and I hate the whole process of it. But I get a lot done when I have that pressure, just and that timeline. Otherwise, this gets sitting there doing nothing because there's no motivation to like get it done.
So I know that you have written a lot of original music, some of it being instrumental and some of it being with lyrics. So what made you decide with the pandemic to release Space specifically?
That was the one song that I didn't really get sick of hearing because I kind of get sick of my own voice. After a while, you're like, did I release this? I don't know, man. I don't like my voice, blah, blah, blah. So the instrumental was like, well, I don't have to sing on it, so it's a little more tolerable.
I know with songs that I write, I go through phases where I'm really excited and proud, and then other phases where I'm like, why did I even think of releasing this? So I kind of bounce back and forth. Is that kind of the same, or once you kind of hit burnout with it, are you kind of done with it, or?
No, I need to take a break from it, and then, give it some time, then I'll go back to it, revisit it, and I'm like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was. And normally I'll be like, oh, I might change something here or there. But if I wait too long and just keep repeating that whole process, it really doesn't get anywhere. And I have a lot of stuff that I'm no longer gonna work on, just because there's not much I can change that would make it better. I mean, maybe there is, but I've just spent so much time on it. I'm like, let's move on and try to write something else.
So Alex, what is the origin of the name Sunjo?
Soonjo is my middle name. It was the name given to me in Korea. I believe it was from my actual birth parents, Soonjo. But don't take my word from it. It could have just been like the organization that just gave me that name. I'm not sure. So, but I mean, my North Dakota parents decided to use that as my middle name to kind of have it always stick with me.
Have a way to kind of keep you somewhat connected to it?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So, I mean, just as like maybe their way of just saying as a reminder of who you are.
Yeah, no, my parents kind of did the same thing where they took my Korean name Dongmin and they kept the Min part. I think for maybe obvious reasons they didn't want to keep Dong in it. So,
Okay.
so Alex, how did you get into music?
I took piano when I was 6 or 7. I liked it, but I don't think I was ready for music at the time. But I mean, I still toughed through it, and then eventually I joined like sports, and then I found a reason to not play piano anymore. But then, like, one of the extracurricular activities that I took was band, concert band. So I just replaced it with another, So then I took saxophone throughout middle school, high school, and 1 year in college. Then I eventually picked up the guitar sophomore year of high school, or something like that. And that was like rock bands and pop rock bands that really kind of got me into it. Back when like pop punk kind of started to make its thing, and the whole punk rock thing. Like, skateboarding was popular too in like the early 2000s, late 90s, that kind of thing. So I definitely hopped on that bandwagon for a little bit. Did skateboarding for a little bit. Wasn't ever good at it, but made me feel cool. Yeah.
Nice. Man, I mean, kind of the same boat. I got really into pop punk when I first got into guitar, and I remember I don't think I ever thought seriously about trying to learn how to skateboard, but I mentioned it once to my dad, and he shot that down pretty quickly.
Yeah,
So,
I don't remember what my parents said. I really don't remember what they said about it. I think I just bought it at Shields. Yeah.
nice.
Well,
I mean,
they gave me a skateboard when I was like, I think like 8 or 9. Actually, it was this Ninja Turtles skateboard. Yeah, I didn't learn any tricks, but they let me go all around. So,
right.
yeah.
I knew you as a guitar player because we'd see each other at Flatland Guitars in Fargo, but then we've played together more with you on drums. So when did you get into drums?
About the same time I got into guitar, actually. I was in a high school band. We would practice like every Wednesday after a church service, inside my buddy's church, because his dad was a pastor. But many of the times, the drummer just wouldn't show up, So we're like, hey, what's going on here? But so then I just eventually hopped on his kit, and just to get things going. And I'm like,
Wow.
hey, this is kind of fun, and it's kind of easy. Well, just being a kid, whatever, just beating away on the drums, you think it's easy, but it's actually not.
I mean, it's very physically demanding.
It's physically demanding, and I definitely developed bad habits. And the older you get, the harder they are to fix. But then, yeah, I eventually picked up on drums and decided that I wanted to be a more of a serious player when I went to IPR in Minneapolis. It was the whole process of learning to record a good, solid take. Because before, I was all just having fun and cool fill-ins. Didn't matter if they were on time. Time? What's that?
What is time? It has no meaning. So.
But like after kind of learning the whole recording process and just how crucial it is to have just a solid take, because like all the drummers that I brought in for like my projects, it wasn't happening, So I'm like, I'm just gonna try this, and then just keep it simple, and it ended up working out a lot better than like some of my friends. But eventually I learned how to be a better coach to them. I learned how to be a producer, so then I could be behind the board and just produce, share the idea, and let a player deliver that out.
So on Space, you're playing drums and guitar on that track, correct?
Correct.
And so most of the people that I've been interviewing are all multi-instrumentalists, that they all play and feel functional on more than one instrument. And so for you, you've mentioned drumming, singing, and guitar playing. Out of those three, do you feel like there's one that you feel that you can express yourself the best on? It's kind of hard now because you're actually incorporating your actual voice. But musically, do you feel like one helps you kind of translate your musical voice through it?
At first I thought it was guitar, but then I eventually said, no, I think I have it better on drums. But then I'm like, well, actually, I probably voice. because depending on what project you're in, there's only so much you can express, without kind of like going overboard. I do think myself as like more versatile on the drums, just because you can kind of get away with like backbeats, and that has a wide range of styles.
Well, it kind of sounds like it's changed over time.
Yeah, it's changed over time.
So, out of maybe drummers or guitar players or singers, is there anyone right now that you're listening to that's really inspiring you or getting you to think about those instruments in a different way?
Oh man, I mean, honestly, ever since I joined Jessica's group, I kind of went back into like what the more younger crowd, if that makes sense. Whatever the kids are listening to now these days. That's kind of, that's kind of what it's been like, because I didn't pay attention to that music for quite some time after I moved back from Minneapolis. I was like, no, I want to listen to like what I want to listen to and everything, and I didn't gravitate towards like pop stuff really, just because I thought it was repetitive, too commercial, just this kind of factory made product that only lasted, that maybe like kind of got you that high for about like a week or two, and then they just pump out the next unit, pump out the next song, which I kind of think still happens today.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, like punk rock and rock was the thing, but I've been listening to it now. It's just, you can only take so much before your ears just get tired.
It's pretty jarring, isn't it?
Yeah. But then but eventually that style of music became almost factory made too.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just like, hey, we need a band that plays rock music and can be edgy and punky, and eventually there's so much it's not edgy anymore, and it's just like stale rock. And I mean, I'm sure eventually like the kind of maybe like that whole pop funk stuff might eventually get there, because now that's the trend. Now everyone's going to be making all these, this style of music. So you just gotta stay just 1-2 steps ahead of the game, or just say and do your own thing.
Yeah.
I guess no, and if you just, I think if you just stick to your own thing, eventually people will see, and if you're honest with yourself too, people will see it.
For sure. I think it's a pretty big mountain to climb, but I think that if you kind of play your cards right and are very persistent with it, it's kind of like people eventually won't have a choice to not hear about it, or ideally.
And like, we're always influenced by like the new styles of music that are coming, and it inspires you, which is really great too. A problem that I've ran into is like when I get too inspired by the trends, and then all the stuff that I write sounds exactly like that, or like a watered down, less high produced quality of that stuff, and it's usually garbage.
It's like derivative, and it doesn't feel like genuine and everything.
Genuine. So I mean, yeah, you just gotta like do your own thing.
So Alex, growing up, did you feel like your adoption was an open topic that you could talk about either with your parents or your friends?
I personally didn't talk about it a whole lot. In the 90s, I guess, there was kind of always that if you're adopted, you're not as wanted, or, your parents didn't love you, all that kind of jargon, that other people say about people who are adopted or whatever. So I always tried to avoid that and just not mention it. But it was kind of hard to, I mean, when your parents were white, it's pretty obvious that you were adopted. My parents didn't really talk about it either. They were kind of in the mentality of, oh, well, you're just like everyone else. Don't worry about it. Just shrug it off. You're just like everyone else. And I just kind of was like, all right, whatever, didn't really care until maybe I was older, which I guess I don't fully agree with that type of talk from parents to kids, to their adopted kids. What I really think should happen is like they should talk a lot about it, even though it might make them feel uncomfortable, because maybe there is that fear of like, what if they end up going back to their birth parents? That's something the parents should be willing, or should be like at least be ready for, if that decision ever happens, because it's not their choice, it's our choice.
The sweep it under the rug approach, I think, can be pretty damaging in the long run.
I think so too. Yeah.
It it might. It's kind of that thing where I'll just say it doesn't matter, so I don't have to put myself in a vulnerable position as a parent, and then the kid might be like, "Oh, okay," and they're like, "Oh, phew, avoided that talk." And then, potentially that kid could kind of grow up their entire lives with that mentality of it's always swept under the rug, until one day they look under the rug. They're like, what is all of this?
I grew up in a small Midwestern town called Jamestown in North Dakota. And it was mostly white. And the mentality was kind of like the whole like, oh, shucks, let's not talk about it. Let's not cause trouble. Let's not cause a scene. So, I think a lot of those talks are avoided because of that mentality, which I think it might work for, like, say, your typical white family, but when you physically look different, it doesn't work so much, because people ask questions. Like, what? You're a Chinese guy with a Dutch name? And then they're just like baffled, like, what? Yeah.
It can be super overwhelming, I think, and can be really isolating sometimes if you're the only person that that is a person of color growing up, or the only person that's adopted that or the only person that is in our case, a Korean adoptee. I think not having some form of community to talk to, like, oh, this happens to you too, or you think about this too, it can be really lonesome.
With that whole Midwestern mentality of kind of sweep it under the rug, it'll go away. I mean, you're not facing the problem head on. But like in the real world, these problems do exist, or these issues do exist, and sweeping it under the rug doesn't work at all. And it taught, that whole mentality taught me to avoid other Asians when I was a kid, because you didn't want to be seen as, oh, look, it's the two Asians together. You're causing a scene, and I'm different now. And the whole saying, oh, you're just like everyone else. But in the real world, no, you're not. You're not like everyone else. And I think one thing that needs to be taught to any kids who are adopted, especially people of color, is that you are different, and you should be proud that you're different. As a kid, you're just taught to be like everyone else, even though you're not like everyone else. And plus, it gives you an edge in life and society.
Could you elaborate on that? Like, how does it give you an edge?
Because you are different, because you stand out. But I guess it's up to you to make that choice, whether it's a good edge or a negative.
Like pros or cons.
Yeah, and for the longest time, I was like, no, it's bad. I have to act very, very North Dakota white just to fit in, because you're kind of taught that that's the number one way to be acceptable in life, is to be very Midwestern, be very white, if you want to call it that, and not being reinforced that your difference does make you special.
And it's hard, I think, growing up in this area where there's it's rare to see someone else leading by example that's an alternative to the white norm. How common was it for us to have people of color in teaching positions or members of city council or anything that was a leadership position? And if you don't see anyone in your community leading by example, that can be really hard. Mixed with, growing up, I think most kids just kind of want to be invisible because growing up is awkward and hard. And then there's this extra thing that you're like, oh, come on, like I just don't look at me, But all that's like a blender that's just this really uncomfortable smoothie.
Yeah, right. I mean, and then and then you try to kind of blend in, but you can't because you physically look different. I have a big problem with the media representation that specifically Asians have gotten, in like the 80s, the 90s, and prior to that even,
Yeah, to a whole generation of people, like their only reference point is like Long Duck Dong.
Yeah, or go some minor character. You have the Asian as like the sub character just to make the boring protagonist not so boring. And so I get kind of, I mean, I'm pretty sick of that. But it also, I think it's very damaging to the young kids because it teaches them that that their value isn't as high as the white kids or whatever. And it teaches, and it's just kind of a cycle that just keeps going and going and going. And I mean, but really, something's got to just change. And I think it is happening. But it's, oh man, it's just going to take so much time,
Yeah.
a very slow process, moving forward and then kind of going backwards again, going forward a little bit, and so on, and until eventually, you might get there.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, it feels like a pretty long and winding
Right.
road.
But we're the start, though. We're the start. Though. So I mean, if we don't do something now, that the cycle will continue to keep going.
So how did you feel during the peak of Crazy Rich Asians and the explosion of K-pop? Neither of those things existed in the way that they do now here.
Right.
In terms of growing up, most kids, I felt like, did not know where Korea was on a map. They only knew about Japan and China because of anime and buffets. And then it was really rare to see a lot of Asian representation in films. And then there's no way that while we were growing up, there were people, or large amounts of people listening to like Asian pop music. But now through this explosion of K-pop and everything, I feel like the dynamic is a lot different.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see that K-pop is popular in the U.S. It's just another form of good media representation, which I can tell that it is affecting our young kids in a good way. And it just kind of shows that, like, I guess tells people that, like, you have nothing to be afraid of.
Right.
I mean, I'm really glad to see that type of representation going on in America. I have friends who are into K-pop, and they do a great job. I mean, you look at, like, BTS. Their dance moves are phenomenal, and they're very talented. So I'm really glad to see that in America, because it's always just been white dudes, white people as like kind of the leaders in music and everything. And there's nothing wrong with like sharing the seat. It's not a single seat; it's a giant bench.
Growing up, I'd try to stay up to watch the bands who were playing on Letterman, and I was always like, why is there no one that ever looks like me up there? Because I want to be up there.
Yeah.
And it was always, there's always that kind of that disconnection point where it was like, I mean, there's got to be bands with Asian people in it, right? Like those exist.
Right.
But since you don't see it, it's almost like a mythical creature.
Right, and especially as like say the singer, you know, because like they get the most face time on TV. They're the ones, and plus even like you know, humans just automatically respond to the human voice. You know, so in a song, for example, what's the most important part of the song? The vocal. In a nutshell, it's the vocal. Just our ears just naturally go to where we're sensitive to that range. So when it comes to like frontmen or front women, Asians really haven't been on there. Also, at the same time, when you have like say the Asian man versus the Asian woman, it's different because women are so sexualized to begin with. I feel that the Asian woman would be the one chosen by a white man who's in power. So, like for example, like the higher ups, mostly old white dudes, they would more likely pick an Asian female over an Asian male because they could sexualize the Asian female more, and then maybe make more money because the idea that sex sells and everything. I mean, I kind of think it's a problem. I really do. But honestly, I don't know if that's gonna go away just overnight or anything like that.
No.
But like, I definitely think that like Asian males and male and females just need to be allied together, because I do think there is some type of belief that they shouldn't be allies, and the belief that if you ally with a white person, you gain more status, you gain more points in life, which I think that's what kind of what white people want. They want that status for them, so they're only. It's like this. It's not that they're purposely trying to split us apart, but I think they see the gain if they do. If it's like, well, they're just gonna ally up with each other, but why not split them apart? Then they can ally with me, and then he can ally with you, or something like that. Then white people always win.
You mentioned the bench metaphor, and it's not even necessarily like a problem of. It's not that I don't want you to sit here. I just really want to make sure that I still am able to have the same amount of space that I'm used to on the said bench. I don't want to have to be squished. So, Alex, I know that you have traveled to Korea and you did reconnect with some biological family. Would you be willing to talk about that experience?
So I went to Korea the summer after I graduated from high school. We went to Seoul, Busan, and I think some other places, but it was mostly Seoul. That's where I was born. I did get to meet my birth parents, which was pretty cool. I found out I have siblings, in fact, a bunch of them, 2 older sisters and 2 younger twin brothers, which is kind of crazy. They didn't speak English though, so we had a translator. Though I was pretty young, just out of high school, I wasn't able to soak it all in. But I would love to go back. But I'm really glad I went there at the time. We went with a tour agency, and they kind of gave us the whole tour of everything. And it was a culture that I enjoyed, but God, being from the Midwest all my life, after about like 2 weeks in, I'm just like, hey, I just want an American cheeseburger.
Well, we've traveled together, and I know that you have a pretty particular palate, so.
Yeah.
Going from Jamestown, North Dakota to the heart of Seoul, South Korea can be. Just in general, it sounds like sensory overload.
Yeah, it was, but I was able to find my own comfort zone. There was other adoptees on there who I, made friends with, and we always kind of like, talked about it. And like, she wanted a cheeseburger as well, just as much as I did too. It never tasted better.
So, Alex, thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to do this. Where can people find your music?
You can find my music on iTunes, Spotify, any type of streaming thing. You can email me at soonjomusic@gmail.com.
And then are you on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah, I am on social media. You can check that out, Soonjo Music, and just type that in. I think really the most important thing that I really want to, for adoptees, future adoptees to learn too, or just all adoptees, I guess, for that matter, is that, it's okay to be different. That's something you should definitely embrace and be proud of. And don't let other people kind of take that away from you. Don't, they'll find ways to say, no, you're not different or anything like that. And maybe they might be saying it in to try to make you feel better, but you fight back and say, no, I am different, and just own it. Be proud that you're different. And that will totally give you an edge in life. And I'm so glad to be different than your typical North Dakota person, and I do believe that gives people like you, me, an edge in a society like this.
Well, thanks so much again, Alex, for taking the time, and take care, my man.
All right. See you, Connor.